The mess hall of Outpost Zeta-7 buzzed with the usual evening chatter. Soldiers from 12 different species shared meals, swapped stories, and complained about the endless war against the Void Swarm. In the far corner, sitting alone at a small table, Corporal Jake Morrison picked at his protein ration while reading a worn piece of paper. Jake had been fighting in this galactic war for 3 years now. Earth had joined the Galactic Defense Coalition when the Void Swarm first appeared, threatening to consume every inhabited world in their path. Humans were new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 decades earlier. Most alien species saw them as primitive newcomers, useful only as cannon fodder. The human soldier looked tired. His dark hair was unkempt, and deep shadows circled his eyes. He'd been through 17 major battles, lost more friends than he cared to count, and hadn't seen Earth in over a year. The paper in his hands was creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. Across the mess hall, a massive figure approached. Keth Var stood nearly 9 feet tall, his reptilian scales gleaming under the artificial lights. The Draknari warrior was known throughout the outpost for his incredible strength and aggressive nature. His species had been fighting the Void Swarm for over a century, and they took pride in their warrior culture. Keth Var's amber eyes fixed on the solitary human. Like many of his kind, he believed humans were weak creatures who had no business in real combat. They were small, fragile, and seemed to break under pressure far too easily. The Draknari had heard stories of human cowardice, of entire human units retreating when faced with overwhelming odds. "Human," Keth Var's voice rumbled like distant thunder. The entire mess hall fell silent as conversations stopped mid-sentence. "I challenge you to combat." Jake looked up slowly, his tired eyes meeting the alien's fierce gaze. "I'm eating dinner." "You dishonor this place with your presence," Keth Var continued, his forked tongue flicking out briefly. "Your species contributes nothing to this war. You are weak, pathetic creatures who hide behind others when the fighting becomes difficult." Other soldiers began gathering around, forming a loose circle. This wasn't unusual. Challenges happened regularly among the different species. It was a way to settle disputes and establish dominance. Jake noticed several Draknari warriors nodding in approval, while a few human soldiers looked worried. "I don't want to fight you," Jake said quietly, carefully folding the paper and placing it in his breast pocket. Keth Var laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the hall. "Of course you don't. Humans never want to fight when faced with real warriors. You prefer to send others to die while you cower in safety." Jake stood slowly. He was average height for a human, which made him seem tiny compared to the towering Draknari. His combat fatigues were standard issue, nothing special about them. He didn't look like much of a warrior to the assembled aliens. "Look at him," another Draknari called out from the crowd. "He can barely stand upright. How did such weak creatures ever survive long enough to reach space?" "Their world must be a paradise," Keth Var sneered. "No real predators, no challenges to make them strong. They probably lived in caves, afraid of their own shadows." Jake's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Around the circle, alien soldiers from various species watched with interest. Some looked amused, others seemed bored. The Veltar, with their insect-like features, clicked their mandibles in what might have been laughter. The crystalline Zephyrite chimed softly, their translucent bodies refracting the overhead lights. "I've seen humans in battle," Keth Var announced to the crowd. "They panic at the first sign of real danger. They abandon their posts and run like frightened animals. Their so-called courage is just an act they put on when they think others are watching." A young human private near the edge of the crowd started forward, anger flashing in his eyes. But Jake caught his gaze and shook his head slightly. The private stopped, confused but obedient. "Will you fight or will you run?" Keth Var demanded, stepping closer until he loomed directly over Jake. Show everyone here what humans are really made of. Prove that your species deserves to stand alongside real warriors." Jake looked around the circle of faces. He saw expectation, amusement, and in some cases contempt. The other human soldiers looked tense, ready to defend their comrades' honor. The aliens seemed to expect exactly what Kethvar had predicted, a display of human cowardice. "Fine," Jake said simply, "but not here. The training deck has proper safety protocols." Kethvar's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Excellent. Let us see what the mighty humans can do when they can't hide behind their technology and superior numbers." The crowd began moving toward the training deck, excitement building among the various species. Word spread quickly through the outpost's communication systems. Within minutes, hundreds of soldiers were making their way to witness the challenge. The training deck was a large, rectangular space with reinforced walls and energy barriers to contain combat exercises. Weapons racks lined the walls, containing everything from simple melee weapons to advanced energy rifles. Medical stations stood ready at each corner, staffed by automated systems capable of treating injuries from multiple species. Jake walked to one of the weapon racks and selected a simple combat knife. Standard issue, nothing fancy. Kethvar chose a massive war hammer that would have required 2 humans just to lift. The Draknari swung it experimentally, and the air whistled around the heavy head. "Last chance to withdraw," Kethvar called out as they moved to the center of the deck. "I don't wish to kill you, human. A beating should be sufficient to make my point." Jake tested the weight of his knife, then looked up at his towering opponent. "I appreciate the concern." The crowd pressed against the safety barriers, hundreds of alien eyes watching intently. Holographic displays activated around the deck's perimeter, allowing those further back to see clearly. The excitement was palpable. Many had never seen a human fight seriously before. Lieutenant Commander Salthis, a serpentine Naga who served as the outpost's deputy commander, stepped forward to officiate. "Combat will continue until one participant yields or is unable to continue. Medical intervention will be immediate upon conclusion. Are both participants ready?" Kethvar raised his massive weapon. "Ready." Jake simply nodded, the knife held loosely at his side. "Begin." Kethvar moved with surprising speed for his size, bringing the warhammer down in a devastating overhead strike. Jake stepped aside at the last possible second, and the hammer's head struck the deck with a thunderous impact that sent vibrations through the floor. Before Kethvar could recover, Jake was moving. He darted in close, too close for the long-handled weapon to be effective, and drove his knee upward into the Draknari's solar plexus. The alien stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt. "Lucky," Kethvar growled, spinning the hammer to create distance. "Let's see you dodge this." The Draknari launched into a series of powerful swings, each one capable of crushing bones. Jake moved like water, flowing around each attack with minimal effort. He seemed to anticipate where the hammer would be, always just out of reach. The crowd grew quieter, their initial excitement replaced by confusion. This wasn't going as expected. The human should have been overwhelmed by now, crushed by superior strength and size. Kethvar's breathing became labored. The heavy weapon and his aggressive attacks were taking their toll. Sweat beaded on his scaled skin as he continued his assault, growing more frustrated with each missed strike. Jake, meanwhile, showed no signs of fatigue. He moved with calm precision, never seeming rushed or desperate. When opportunities presented themselves, he struck. Quick jabs with the knife that found gaps in Kethvar's defense, drawing thin lines of blue blood across the alien's arms and torso. "Stand still and fight!" Kethvar roared, swinging the hammer in a wide arc that Jake ducked under easily. "I am fighting," Jake replied calmly, stepping inside the Draknari's guard and driving the knife toward his opponent's throat. Kethvar barely managed to catch Jake's wrist, stopping the blade inches from his neck. For a moment, they were locked together, the massive alien using both hands to hold back the human's single arm. The crowd gasped. Keth Var was renowned for his strength, capable of bending steel bars with his bare hands. Yet here he was, struggling against a human who looked like he belonged behind a desk rather than on a battlefield. Jake's free hand moved to his pocket, withdrawing the folded paper. Keth Var's eyes widened in confusion as the human held it up where both of them could see it. "You want to know what humans are really made of?" Jake said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Read this." With his knife hand still pressing toward Keth Var's throat, Jake unfolded the paper with one hand. The writing was in English, but the outpost's universal translators quickly converted it for everyone present. Keth Var read the first few lines, and his expression changed completely. The aggressive confidence drained from his face, replaced by something that might have been shock. Jake released the pressure on his knife and stepped back, allowing Keth Var to lower his arms. The Draknari continued reading, his amber eyes growing wider with each line. "What does it say?" someone in the crowd called out. Jake folded the paper carefully and returned it to his pocket. When he looked up, his tired eyes held a depth that many of the aliens were seeing for the first time. "It's a letter," he said simply. "From my daughter." The training deck remained silent except for the hum of the energy barriers. Keth Var stood motionless, still processing what he had read. Around the perimeter, hundreds of alien soldiers waited for an explanation that would make sense of what they had just witnessed. Jake picked up his combat knife from where he had dropped it and walked toward the weapon rack. As he moved, he began to speak, his voice carrying to every corner of the deck. "She wrote it 3 months ago, before the Battle of Kepler 7. I've been carrying it ever since, reading it whenever I need to remember why I'm here." He placed the knife back in its slot and turned to face the crowd. "Would you like to know what it says?" Jake walked slowly around the perimeter of the training deck, his footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. Every alien soldier watched him with newfound attention, their previous assumptions crumbling like sand castles before an incoming tide. "My daughter's name is Emma," Jake began, his voice steady but soft. "She's 8 years old. When I left Earth to join this war, she gave me this letter. She made me promise to read it whenever I felt scared or sad." He pulled the worn paper from his pocket again, unfolding it with the care one might show a religious artifact. The holographic displays zoomed in, allowing everyone to see the childish handwriting, the small drawings in the margins, the obvious love that had gone into every word. "Dear Daddy," Jake read aloud, the universal translators carrying his words to every species present. "I know you have to go fight the bad monsters in space. Mommy explained that they want to hurt people and you're going to stop them. I'm scared for you, but I'm also proud because you're the bravest person I know." Keth Var, who had been standing frozen since reading the letter himself, slowly sank to one knee. His massive warhammer lay forgotten on the deck beside him. Around the training area, other Draknari warriors shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence evaporating. "I drew you a picture of our house so you won't forget what it looks like," Jake continued, pointing to a crude crayon drawing at the bottom of the page. "And I drew Mr. Whiskers, too, because he misses you almost as much as I do. He sleeps on your side of the bed now, and Mommy pretends she doesn't know." Several human soldiers in the crowd were wiping their eyes, but it wasn't just them. Some of the Veltar's antennae drooped, and a few Zephyrite had dimmed their internal light significantly. Even species that didn't express emotion the way humans did seemed affected by the simple words. "Mrs. Patterson at school says the monsters are really far away, and that there are lots of brave soldiers fighting them. She says they can't get past all of you to hurt us. I believe her, but I still check under my bed sometimes just in case." Jake paused, looking up at the assembled crowd. "You want to know what humans are made of? We're made of children who check under their beds at night. We're made of families who send their fathers and mothers and sons and daughters across the galaxy to fight monsters they've never seen, in places they can't even pronounce. A young Veltar soldier, his insectoid features twitching nervously, stepped forward slightly. But humans retreat from battles. We have seen this. Your units fall back when the fighting becomes too intense. Jake nodded slowly. Yes, we do. Would you like to know why? He continued reading from the letter. I hope you're making friends with the other soldiers. Mommy says there are soldiers from lots of different planets fighting together. That sounds really cool. I hope they're nice to you. Jake folded that section and looked directly at the Veltar who had spoken. We retreat because we've learned something that took our species millions of years to understand. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is live to fight another day. Sometimes the most heroic choice is to preserve your forces so you can save more lives tomorrow. He returned to the letter. I want to tell you something important, Daddy. Mr. Henderson next door, the one who was in the old Earth wars, he told me something when you left. He said that real heroes aren't the ones who never get scared. Real heroes are the ones who get scared but do what's right anyway. The training deck remained completely silent, except for Jake's voice. Even the facility's background hum seemed muted, as if the station itself was listening. I get scared too sometimes, especially at night when the thunder is really loud. But then I remember that you're out there, being scared but being brave anyway, so I try to be brave too. When I'm scared, I think about you, and it helps me feel better. A zephyrite near the back of the crowd chimed softly, a sound that their species made when processing deep emotion. Other zephyrite joined in, creating a harmony that resonated through the deck's metal walls. Jake looked up again, his eyes finding Keth Var's. You asked what humans contribute to this war. We contribute perspective. Every species here fights for their home world, their colonies, their people. But humans? We fight for the idea that an 8-year-old girl should never have to be truly afraid of the monsters under her bed. He read the next section. I'm learning about space in school now. Miss Rodriguez showed us pictures of all the different planets where the soldiers come from. Some of them are really pretty. I especially like the ones with the purple skies and the floating mountains. Maybe when you come home we can visit some of them together. Several alien soldiers exchanged glances. The idea of a human child wanting to visit their worlds, seeing beauty in places they had taken for granted, seemed to strike them in unexpected ways. I practice writing your name every day so I won't forget how to spell it. Jacob Morrison. That's 34 letters including the space. I can write it really fast now. I wrote it on all my school papers so everyone knows my daddy is a hero. Jake's voice remained steady, but those close enough could see his hands trembling slightly as he held the letter. You want to know why humans seem weak to you? Because we know what we're fighting for. Not just territory or resources or strategic advantage. We're fighting for the right of children to believe their parents are heroes. We're fighting for the right of little girls to practice writing their father's name. Keth Var finally spoke, his voice much quieter than before. The retreat at Sigma Centauri. Your unit was protecting the evacuation of civilian transports. 17,000 refugees, Jake confirmed, including 3,000 children. We held the line for 6 hours against overwhelming Void Swarm forces, then fell back in stages to keep the escape route open. 43 humans died in that retreat, but every single civilian made it out. The Draknari warrior's head hung low. We called you cowards for withdrawing. I know, Jake returned to the letter. I miss you so much, Daddy. Mommy tries to hide it, but she cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep. I heard her talking to Aunt Sarah on the phone. She said she's proud of you, but she wishes the monsters would just go away so you could come home. Around the training deck, soldiers from a dozen species found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about their human allies. The Veltar who had questioned Jake earlier clicked his mandibles in what, for his species, indicated deep thought. I wish the monsters would go away too, Jake continued reading. But Mr. Henderson says that sometimes, when monsters are really bad, good people have to fight them, even if it's scary. He says that's what makes them good people. Jake looked up from the letter and directly at the assembled crowd. Every species here has been fighting the Void Swarm for decades. You've developed incredible weapons, brilliant strategies, powerful armor. You've built an impressive war machine, but you've forgotten something crucial. He pointed to the letter. You've forgotten that wars aren't won by the strongest or the most advanced. They're won by the side that remembers what they're fighting for. You fight because your worlds are threatened. We fight because an 8-year-old girl shouldn't have to worry about monsters. A Naga officer near the front of the crowd raised her serpentine head. But that is irrational. Personal feelings should not influence military decisions. Jake smiled sadly. That's where you're wrong. Personal feelings are exactly what should influence every military decision. Because the moment we forget why we're fighting, we become no different from the monsters we're fighting against. He read the final paragraph of the letter. I love you, Daddy. Come home safe, and remember, even if you get scared, you're still my hero. You'll always be my hero. Love, Emma. P.S. I lost another tooth. The tooth fairy gave me $5 because I told her it was a hero's tooth. Jake carefully refolded the letter and returned it to his pocket. When he looked up, he found hundreds of alien faces staring at him with expressions he had never seen before. Not contempt or amusement or casual dismissal, something that looked almost like respect. Every human soldier in this war carries something similar, he said quietly. A letter, a photo, a video message, a small toy, something that reminds them of what innocence looks like, what peace feels like, what we're trying to preserve. Kethvar slowly rose to his feet, leaving his weapon on the deck. I apologize, human Jake Morrison. I did not understand. Most species don't, Jake replied. You see our retreats and think we're coward. You see us caring for wounded enemies and think we're weak. You see us refusing certain orders and think we're insubordinate. But you're missing the point. He gestured to encompass all the alien soldiers around him. Every one of you fights like warriors. Humans fight like parents. There's a difference. The training deck remained quiet for several long moments as the assembled soldiers processed this revelation. Finally, a young human private at the back of the crowd spoke up. Corporal Morrison, sir, may I ask, what happened to your daughter's tooth? Jake's serious expression cracked slightly, revealing the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in months. I have it in my other pocket. Emma sent it to me along with the letter. She said even if the Tooth Fairy couldn't find me in space, she wanted me to have it anyway. The reaction was immediate and profound. Species that had never shown humor before began making sounds that might have been laughter. The Zephyrite chimed in harmony again, and several Draknari warriors made low rumbling sounds that indicated approval and amusement. But the real change was in how they looked at him. No longer did they see a weak, primitive human. They saw something they hadn't expected to find in this war. Someone who fought not despite his connections to home, but because of them. Jake picked up Kethvar's warhammer and offered it to the towering alien. Your challenge was fair, and your point was valid. Humans do fight differently than other species. We just fight differently than you expected. Kethvar took his weapon, but made no move to resume combat. The challenge is withdrawn, he announced formally. I have learned what I needed to know about human courage. As the crowd began to disperse, many aliens approached Jake individually. They wanted to hear more about Earth, about human families, about the children waiting for their parents to come home. For the first time since joining the war, Jake found himself at the center of respectful, curious conversations rather than dismissive challenges. But as the training deck emptied and Jake prepared to return to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The letter had done more than just explain human motivations to a crowd of alien soldiers. It had planted seeds of a much larger understanding, and in a war against an enemy that sought to consume all life in the galaxy, that understanding might prove to be humanity's greatest contribution of all. 3 weeks after the challenge in the training deck, Outpost Zeta-7 received an emergency transmission. A massive Void Swarm fleet had broken through defensive lines at the Arcturus sector and was heading directly toward the heavily populated Kepler system. The attack would arrive in less than 48 hours. Commander Thexval, the station's Draknari leader, stood before the assembled officers in the main briefing room. His scaled face was grim as he displayed the tactical projections on the holographic table. The numbers were devastating. "Intelligence estimates over 200 Void Swarm vessels," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable defeat. "They will reach Kepler-4, the system's primary colony world, in approximately 36 hours. The planet holds over 40 million civilians from 17 different species." Lieutenant Commander Salthis, the Naga deputy, studied the data with her serpentine eyes. "Our defensive fleet consists of 47 ships. Even with the reinforcements from Proxima Base, we'll have perhaps 60 vessels. The mathematical probability of victory is effectively 0. Around the table, officers from multiple species nodded in grim agreement. This was how the war had been going for decades. The Void Swarm's seemingly endless numbers overwhelming even the most determined resistance. Worlds fell, populations were consumed, and the galactic community continued its slow retreat toward extinction. "Standard protocol dictates a strategic withdrawal," Commander Thexval continued. "We will evacuate essential personnel and allow the swarm to take the system. Perhaps we can make them pay a heavy price for it." That's when Jake Morrison spoke up from his position near the back of the room. As a mere corporal, he normally wouldn't be included in strategic planning sessions, but his presence had been specifically requested by several senior officers after the incident in the training deck. "Commander, request permission to speak freely." Thexval's amber eyes fixed on the human. Over the past 3 weeks, he had watched many of his officers approach Jake with questions about human tactics and philosophy. The incident with Keth Var had sparked conversations throughout the outpost. "Granted, Corporal." "Sir, what if we don't retreat?" The briefing room fell silent. Several officers stared at Jake as if he had suggested they all remove their environmental suits and walk into vacuum. Captain Zorthak, a heavily armored Veltar, clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Human, the mathematics are clear. We cannot win a direct engagement with forces of this magnitude." "You're right," Jake agreed. "We can't win a direct engagement. But what if we don't engage them directly?" He stepped closer to the holographic display, studying the tactical projections with the same intensity he had shown when reading his daughter's letter. "May I, sir?" Commander Thexval gestured for him to proceed. Jake manipulated the holographic controls, highlighting specific elements of the swarm fleet's projected path. "The Void Swarm has one consistent behavioral pattern," Jake said, drawing lines between various points on the display. "They always go for the largest population centers first. They ignore military targets unless those targets directly threaten their primary objective." "This is known," Lieutenant Commander Salthis said with slight impatience. "It is why our standard strategy focuses on evacuation rather than defense." "Right, but what if we use that against them?" Jake continued to manipulate the display, showing possible fleet positions. "What if instead of evacuating the civilians, we made the swarm think they were somewhere else?" The room stirred with interest. This was not standard military thinking. Jake pulled up detailed scans of the Kepler system. Kepler-4 has 3 major cities, each holding approximately 13 million beings. But look at this. He highlighted a point in space roughly 2 light hours from the planet. "The asteroid mining station at Kepler Delta. It's running at full capacity right now, which means massive energy signatures, lots of industrial activity. Captain Zorthak leaned forward, his compound eyes focusing intently. The mining station holds perhaps 50,000 workers? Exactly. But what if we could make it look like it held 40 million? Commander Thexval's expression shifted from skepticism to curiosity. Continue. Jake's hands moved quickly over the holographic controls, sketching out a complex plan. We evacuate the real population centers quietly, using civilian transports disguised as regular supply ships. Meanwhile, we flood the mining station with fake energy signatures, false life readings, artificial communication traffic. Make it look like the entire population fled there for safety. The swarm would attack the mining station, Lieutenant Commander Salthis said slowly, following the logic. Right. And while they're focused on consuming a target that's mostly empty rock and machinery, our combined fleet hits them from behind, not a direct engagement, hit-and-run attacks, targeting their command ships and supply vessels. The briefing room erupted in discussion as officers from multiple species began analyzing the proposal. Jake continued refining the holographic display, showing potential fleet movements and attack patterns. This is unconventional, Commander Thexval said finally. It relies heavily on deception, rather than superior firepower. Sir, with respect, superior firepower isn't working, Jake replied. We've been trying to outfight the swarm for decades. Maybe it's time to try outsmarting them. Captain Zorthak's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of intense thought in his species. The plan has merit, but it would require unprecedented coordination between multiple species fleets. Our tactical doctrines are completely different. Which brings me to the second part of the proposal, Jake said. He pulled up personnel files, scrolling through hundreds of records. Human tactical doctrine emphasizes small unit flexibility and adaptive command structures. What if we integrated human officers into existing command teams? Not to take over, but to serve as tactical advisors. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Several Draknari officers growled in what might have been offense, while others leaned forward with interest. The Zephyrites chimed in harmony, and the Veltar clicked their mandibles in rapid patterns. You suggest that humans should advise species with centuries more combat experience, Captain Zorthak asked, though his tone was more curious than hostile. I suggest that maybe fresh perspectives might see solutions that experience has overlooked, Jake replied carefully. Every species here has been fighting the same war in the same way for decades. Sometimes an outsider can spot patterns that insiders miss. Commander Thexval studied the proposed plan in silence for several long minutes. Around the table, his officers waited for his decision. Finally, he spoke. Corporal Morrison, your plan is either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. He paused, his reptilian features showing deep concentration. However, the alternative is certain defeat and the loss of 40 million civilian lives. I am authorizing immediate implementation. The next 36 hours transformed Outpost Zeta-7 into a hive of unprecedented activity. Human officers were temporarily assigned to every ship in the defensive fleet, not as commanders, but as strategic consultants. Jake found himself aboard the Draknari flagship Righteous Fury, working directly with Commander Thexval and his senior staff. The evacuation of Kepler-4 proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Civilian transports, disguised as ordinary cargo vessels, began ferrying the population to distant safe zones. Meanwhile, engineering teams worked frantically to create the illusion of a massive refugee camp at the mining station. The deception was elaborate and multi-layered. False heat signatures made it appear as if millions of beings were packed into temporary shelters. Artificial communication networks generated the kind of panicked chatter one would expect from a desperate refugee population. Industrial replicators worked overtime to produce waste heat and energy emissions consistent with 40 million terrified civilians. Jake worked alongside Draknari tactical officers, his human perspective complementing their centuries of combat experience. Together, they refined attack patterns that emphasized mobility over brute force, timing over raw firepower. "Your species has an interesting approach to warfare," observed Sub-Commander Kethvar, who had requested assignment to Jake's planning team. "You treat battle like a conversation with an opponent who cannot hear your words." "That's actually a pretty good analogy," Jake replied, studying fleet positioning charts. "We're trying to tell the swarm a story. We want them to believe that story so completely that they never question it." When the Void Swarm fleet finally arrived at the edge of the Kepler system, everything went exactly as Jake had predicted. The massive bioships, each one kilometers long and pulsing with malevolent energy, made straight for the mining station. Their sensors detected millions of life forms huddled in what appeared to be makeshift refugee camps. The swarm attacked with their typical overwhelming force. Hundreds of smaller vessels swarmed around the mining station while the larger ships began their consumption process. For nearly 2 hours, they focused entirely on what they believed to be the system's entire population. That's when the trap was sprung. The combined galactic fleet, led by human tactical advisors but commanded by experienced alien officers, struck from 3 directions simultaneously. Instead of the traditional frontal assault that had failed so many times before, they used precision strikes against command vessels, supply ships, and communication nodes. The Veltar ships, guided by human tactical advice, used their superior speed to conduct lightning raids on swarm flanks. The Draknari vessels, their natural aggression channeled through human strategic thinking, focused their incredible firepower on critical targets rather than simply trying to destroy everything in sight. The crystalline Zephyrite provided communication coordination that allowed the diverse fleet to operate as a single entity for the first time in the war's history. The battle lasted 14 hours. When it ended, over 60% of the Void Swarm fleet had been destroyed or disabled. The remainder fled the system in disarray, leaving behind the first major galactic victory in decades. In the aftermath, as damage reports came in and casualty lists were compiled, the numbers told an incredible story. The galactic fleet had lost only 8 ships with minimal crew casualties. The Void Swarm, for the first time in anyone's memory, had been not just defeated, but routed. Commander Thexaval stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring out at the debris field where the enemy fleet had been. Beside him, Jake Morrison looked just as tired as he had 3 weeks earlier, but there was something different in his eyes now. "Corporal," Thexaval said finally, "your tactical innovations have given us our first real victory against the swarm. High Command will want a full report on your methods." "Sir." "It wasn't just human methods," Jake replied. "It was what happened when human methods combined with alien experience. The Veltar speed, Draknari firepower, Zephyrite coordination, none of this would have worked without every species contributing their strengths." Kethvar approached from across the bridge. "Human Jake," he said formally, "I must ask you something that has been troubling me since the battle ended." "What's that?" "The mining station. You knew that 50,000 workers would die when the swarm attacked. How do you reconcile this with your philosophy about protecting the innocent?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his hand unconsciously touching the pocket where he kept his daughter's letter. "Because sometimes, Kethvar, protecting 40 million innocent lives requires sacrificing 50,000 brave volunteers. The mining station workers knew the plan. They knew the risks. They chose to stay anyway." He turned to face both alien officers. "Every one of those workers made the same choice my daughter will make someday when she's old enough to understand it. They chose to stand between the monsters and the innocent, knowing they might not survive. That's not a human trait or an alien trait. That's what makes someone a hero, regardless of what species they belong to. News of the victory at Kepler spread throughout the galaxy faster than any previous military communication. For the first time in decades, worlds that had been preparing for inevitable defeat began talking about hope. More importantly, they began asking for human tactical advisors. Within weeks, the entire structure of the galactic war effort began to change. Human officers found themselves assigned to fleets throughout the galaxy, not as commanders, but as partners. The rigid hierarchical military structure that had failed for so long gave way to flexible, adaptive strategies that combined the best of multiple species approaches to warfare. Jake Morrison returned to Outpost Zeta 7 to find that his small corner table in the mess hall had become something of a gathering place. Officers from a dozen species regularly joined him for meals, discussing tactics, sharing stories from their homeworlds, and asking about Earth. One evening, as Jake sat reading his daughter's letter for what might have been the 1,000th time, a young Zephyrite approached his table. The crystalline being's internal light pulsed nervously as she spoke. "Corporal Morrison? I hope I am not intruding, but I wanted to ask you something." "Of course," Jake said, carefully folding the letter. "What can I help you with?" "My homeworld. It has children, too. Young Zephyrites who do not yet understand why their parents must fight in distant wars. Would you help me write something for them? Something that explains why we fight?" Jake smiled, the same genuine expression that had surprised so many aliens in the training deck weeks earlier. "I'd be honored to help. But first, tell me about your children. What are their names?" As the young Zephyrite began describing the crystal gardens where her people's young ones grew and learned, Jake realized that something fundamental had changed in this war. It wasn't just about tactics or strategy anymore. It was about connections. It was about understanding that every species, no matter how different they might seem, was fighting for the same thing humans had always fought for: the right of children to grow up safe, the right of families to stay together, the right of innocence to exist in a universe that often seemed determined to destroy it. And for the first time since the war began, that right seemed like something they might actually win.